Boldwood presents Christmas at Corner Cottage, written by Sarah Hope and read by Sophie Dora Hall. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Biting down on her bottom lip, the sharp metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, momentarily focusing Chrissy Marsden's attention. Shifting the hamster cage onto her hip, she politely shook Evan Shaw's hand. "Pleasure doing business with you." Well, under different circumstances. Evan looked down at his feet, before heading back inside the house and firmly shutting the front door. "Do you want me to take Star?" Andrew indicated to the rusty heap on the driveway, the soppy face of a collie cross pressed against the passenger window. "Now you ask. You know how difficult it was for me to find a place to rent that allowed dogs. If you'd said you'd have taken her before I'd signed, I would have said, yes, sure, make my life a little easier. But no. You watch me go through the ordeal of actually thinking I'd have to make the choice between taking her to a rescue centre or making the kids homeless." Shaking her head, she looked back at her car, Star pawing the window, desperate to escape the injustice of being cooped up while they dragged the last of their possessions out of the house. Plus, the kids are expecting her to come now. "Okay, I only asked." Holding his hands up, he shook his head. "Evan did offer to rent this place to you." "Yes, well, I don't think that would have been such a good idea, do you? For the kids, I mean." She knew a lot of women stayed in the marital home when their marriage ended, but with it being sold to a landlord, nope, it wouldn't be the same. She couldn't picture living in their old home that wasn't theirs anymore. No. "I'm just saying this was your choice." Again, Andrew waved his right arm, taking in her car with the trailer attached, piled high with their belongings. "Right. My choice. Of course." "No need to be like that." He looked back at the house. "I'm going to get off now." "Bye then." Chrissy looked down at the hamster as he squirmed out of his little plastic house, eyeing her nervously. "It's okay, Patch. I'm not going to drop you. I know how that feels." Twisting around, she watched Andrew stroll up to her car as Evie and Sophia tumbled out and ran towards their father. "Dad, why don't you come with us? You and Mum can change your minds. This doesn't even have to happen." Looking up at him, Evie hugged her dad. "Don't be stupid, Evie. It's done. Look, our old home is... It doesn't mean Dad can't come with us. Does it, Mum?" Evie's eyes flickered from her dad to Chrissy. Looking down, Chrissy stared at Patch. She'd been through this so many times with the girls. Both her and Andrew had spoken to them numerous times in the long 8 months since he told her he didn't love her anymore. Sophia had understood. But Evie, well, she was forever the optimist, and Chrissy didn't have the heart to tell her the real reason Andrew was leaving. "Dad, please." "Evie, I'm sorry. I've got to get back to work now." Andrew kissed them both on their heads and straightened his tie before walking to his car. Chrissy shrugged. She obviously wasn't even worthy of a second more of his time. A minute later and he was gone, his company car pulling away, not even a second glance back at her. "Come on, girls, in the car. Let's begin our new adventure." Chrissy nudged them both with a hamster cage. "Who's having this one on their laps?" "She can. It was Evie who wanted a hamster." Scowling, Sophia pointed at Evie. "Okay, here you go, Evie." Chrissy plonked the cage on Evie's lap before sliding into the driver's seat, pushing Star back onto her side of the car. "Sit still, you daft dog." "Don't call her daft, Mum. You're not daft, are you, Star? You just don't like the car, do you?" In the rearview mirror, Chrissy watched as Sophia rolled her eyes and punched her sister on the arm. "Sophia Marsden, how many times do I have to tell you not to hurt your sister?" "Well, she's being stupid. Again. I don't know why you just don't tell her the truth, that daft dogs can't answer back or understand what humans say." "She can too." "What? Talk? Right. Okay, Evie. Whatever." "No, she can understand. Can't you, Star? You're a clever girl, aren't you? Yes, you are." "Girls, please stop. Star, get down. She pulled Star down, her front paws finally unclinging from the back of the chair as she tried to get to Evie. Chrissy shook her head. The girls had begun to get their signature teenage moods already. They were only 10. She shrugged. She supposed it was inevitable that things would be worse with twins. She remembered when they found out she was expecting twins. Her and Andrew had spoken endlessly about how lovely it would be that their girls would have a best friend for life. Unfortunately, the reality was somewhat different. Instead, they just bounced off each other. And the older they got, the more they seemed to revel in annoying one another. At least Sophia did. Poor Evie, the meeker of the two, just seemed to wind her sister up unintentionally. "Are we there yet?" Evie looked up from cooing over Patch. "We've only just left our old town. We've got at least another—" "Yes, well, if we'd been allowed to be like a normal family and stay in the same town, we'd be at our crummy new house by now." Sophia crossed her arms. Chrissy gritted her teeth. She could hardly tell them that as an unemployed single mum with 2 kids, a dog, and a hamster, the only way she'd been able to secure a tenancy had been to find a private landlord who would agree to take a hefty deposit and 6 months' rent up front. Of course, if their father had told her he would have taken Star before today, then things may have been different. But, as it stood, he hadn't. And so here they were, moving to a remote village an hour and a half away from all their friends. It was all very well Andrew saying the landlord, who had brought their small but much-loved marital home, had offered it to her, but she couldn't have afforded the 6 months' rent. Not at the rate they charged in their old town. No, she'd had no choice. "I know you're upset to be leaving, Sophia, but it'll be an adventure, a new start. A lonely start away from all my friends, you mean? You'll make new friends." "No, I won't. And I won't even try because you forced me into this, Mum. You've taken me away from my home and I'll never forgive you." Sophia jutted out her chin, closed her eyes and pulled her headphones on. Chrissy could hear the beat of the angry bass even from the front of the car, but also knew it would make things worse if she said anything. Having her iPod up that loud once wasn't going to harm her hearing, was it? "Mum, I can hear Sophia's music. Can you tell her to turn it down? It's giving me a headache." "Evie, sweetheart, just leave her be for a bit. You can see she's upset." "I'm upset too. I really thought you wouldn't make Dad go. I thought you'd get back together." Staring at the road ahead, she switched the headlights on. "I didn't make Dad go. You know that, don't you? It's just one of those things. Adults break up sometimes. I'm sorry. I just miss him." "You've only just said bye to him. Plus, you'll see him every other weekend." Watching Evie's cheeks glisten with tears broke Chrissy's heart. It wasn't her fault. She had to remember that. Chrissy hadn't asked for any of this. "I still miss him. I don't want us to live away from him. I want us to be a family again." Balancing Patch's cage on her knees, she quickly swiped the tears away with the sleeves of her hoodie. "We'll still be a family. We just won't live with Daddy. Lots of families are the same. Didn't Matty's parents from your old class split up last year?" "Yes, and his dad moved abroad." Evie burst into fresh sobs. Of course he did. Why hadn't Chrissy remembered that? What a stupid example. "He might do. Anything can happen now." "He won't, I promise. Now, why don't you open that pack of sweets I got you for the journey?" Reaching behind, Chrissy patted Evie's leg before fixing her attention back to the road. The sky was darkening still. Rain was all she needed with only a tarp, and a good few gaps around the outside, protecting their things in the trailer. "Sorry, Mum." "Sorry about what, Evie?" Chrissy strained to hear Evie's soft whisper. "Sorry for saying it was your fault. I know it's not. I'm just sad." "Oh, darling, that's okay." Chrissy pulled a few strands of hair from her messy bun and twisted them around her finger. "Mum?" "Yes, Evie?" "When are we going to get there?" "It shouldn't be much further." Chrissy tapped the sat-nav. They should have been there at least 20 minutes ago. Maybe there were roadworks or some reason the sat-nav was taking her a longer route. "Another 15 minutes, perhaps." I'm hungry. Can we stop and get something, please? The windscreen wipers sped backwards and forward as they cruised along the sheen-covered road. Looking in the rearview mirror, Chrissy could see a line of cars trailing behind them. She shrugged. There wasn't much she could do. She realised she was barely doing half the speed limit, but even at that speed, the trailer was bouncing behind them. Trying to avoid the potholes seemed to make it worse. The trailer just weaved across the road. But she was doing it. She was pulling the trailer, despite the fact that Andrew had told her that her little car wouldn't cope with the weight. I don't think so. We'll be there soon. Chapter 2. Here we go. Moorfield. Our new home. As they drove into the village, Chrissy twisted around to smile at Evie and Sophia. Evie still clung to Patch's cage, while Sophia had nodded off, her head leaning against the window, headphones pushed down to her neck. Evie, love, can you wake Sophia for me, please? Sophia! Sophia! Chrissy watched in the rearview mirror as Evie poked her sister. Sophia stirred, moving slightly before closing her eyes again. Sophia, you need to wake up now. We're here. Chrissy jiggled Sophia's leg with one hand before returning to the 10-2 position on the steering wheel that her driving instructor had ingrained in her. Okay, I'm awake. Rubbing her eyes, Sophia peered out of the window. There's a good girl. Now look out of Evie's window. We're just about to go past your new school. Chrissy pointed towards the left. An old Victorian building peeked above a camouflage of trees, the recent cold weather having stolen a number of leaves, leaving the school building more exposed to the roadside than it had been when they had visited 3 weeks ago. Sophia, it doesn't look creepy in the slightest. Yes, it looks different from your old school, but that's only because it was built over 100 years ago. It's full of character. It's beautiful. It was true. The ornate archway leading into the building from the playground stood proud, pale bricks fanning the entranceway. I don't like it. I liked our old school. You know the one I mean, Mum? The one where I actually had friends? I'm going to be miserable here. I hate it. Crossing her arms, Sophia pursed her lips. You'll make friends here, Sophia. I promise. Chrissy tapped her fingers against the steering wheel. She was certain they would settle and make friends easily, especially Sophia. She had always been the more outgoing one, the one who took the lead and went off to search for people she deemed to be friend-worthy when they started a new club. She nodded. Sophia would make friends anywhere. They both would. She'd always done her best to socialise them both. The amount of money she had spent on various clubs for them over the years had always been a sore point between her and Andrew. There's no point me trying to make friends here anyway. I'll get settled here and then we'll just move again. No, we won't. We'll make a new life here, a really good life. You'll see. How can anything be good around here? Look at it. It's lovely here. There's a lovely park and lots of places to take Star for walks. Plus, Stratford-upon-Avon is just a few minutes away, and there's always something going on there. A park? You do know that we're 10 now, right? And who wants to go on a stupid walk with Star? I bet it always rains here too. Now you're just being silly, Sophia. You're excited about starting school tomorrow, aren't you, Evie? Looking back at Evie, she silently pleaded for backup. Not really, Mum. Evie looked down at Patch, who was poking his head out of his little plastic house again, probably wondering what all the commotion was about. I'm feeling a tiny bit nervous, really. Evie, it'll be okay. You'll soon make friends, both of you will. Plus, you've got each other. Most people would have to start on their own, so you're ahead of the game already. Smiling, she blinked against the sting in her eyes. When they had looked around primary schools before the girls had started, both her and Andrew had fallen in love with the newly built, busy, dynamic school they had ended up sending them to, and it had been the right decision. They had both been happy there. But now, moving an hour and a half away, it just wasn't possible to keep them there. When she'd taken the girls to look around Moorfield Primary, it had seemed nice. Not as bright and airy as their old school, but small and friendly. Like a little family, really. The head teacher had known every child he had come across, by name. Plus, the class sizes were smaller, which could only be a good thing. I hope so. It will. You'll see. It wasn't as though she had wanted them to have to swap schools. It had just worked out that way. When they had accepted the offer on the marital home, she'd had to find somewhere for them to live, and this place in Moorfield had seemed perfect. The private landlord had agreed to allow Star and to sign a tenancy over to her if she paid 6 months' rent up front, unlike all of the estate agents she'd contacted, who seemed to have a computer-says-no generic fit for single mums with no income and a dog. No, the best thing had been to take this house in this village. "Where's the stupid cottage, then?" Sophia looked up. The next turning on the left, I believe. Are you excited to finally see inside? I know we saw the photos the landlord sent us, but it's not the same, is it? Not excited, no, but I bagsy the bigger bedroom. Sophia glanced sideways at Evie, a slow grin spreading across her face. That's fine. She can have the bigger bedroom. I like the small pink room anyway. It looks so cosy in the photo. Okay, that was easy then. Bedroom's chosen. I wonder what the front garden looks like now. Hopefully better than it did before. Yes, it should do. The landlord, Mr. Lowen, was going to get a gardener in, so it should be lovely now. When they had driven by after visiting the school, the cottage garden had looked so overgrown. Ivy had been swamping the short fence around the garden, and it had looked as though the couple of hedges flanking the gateway had been left to their own devices for years. When Chrissy emailed her concerns, Mr. Lowen had promised to get a gardener round before they moved in. Almost there now. As she took the sharp left turn, Chrissy smiled. She was looking forward to village life, to a new start. Even with the rain pelting against the windscreen, their little lane looked beautiful. Brick cottages tucked away on one side, with a large green opposite, which would be perfect for the twins to run off some energy. At the end of the lane, a wood arched around the back of the cottages, and the park and local shop were a short walk away at the end of the high street. Look, Sophia, we could play tag on the green. Tag is for babies. Sophia looked over at Star, who had begun to whimper and paw at the door. What's wrong with a stupid dog? Don't call her stupid, Mum! Sophia called Star stupid again. Holding on to Patch's cage with one hand, Evie leant forward and patted Star. She's just eager to get out and explore our new home, that's all. Pulling up against the narrow pathway in front of the cottage, the trailer bounced to a stop behind them. That's strange. Leaning across Star, Chrissy wiped the condensation from the passenger window and peered out. The garden was untouched. Leaves, soggy from the rain, covered the small cracked slab pathway towards the front door, and the hedges still He didn't send a gardener then. Sophia crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Maybe he couldn't get someone to come and sort it out in time. I'll send him an email when we're all settled in. Right, I'm going to go and get the key and open up. You two may as well stay here in the dry. You'll be quick, won't you, Mum? Evie looked nervously up and down the lane. Of course I will. Pulling her hood up, Chrissy slipped into the rain, making her way to the gate. The landlord had said the key would be under a rock, with their door number written on, somewhere near the front door. Pushing the gate gently open, she squeezed between the hedges and made her way down the path, careful to avoid the puddles filling the gaping holes between the slabs. Now, where was that rock? There it was, marked with the number 3. Squatting down, she lifted it up, feeling around in the moss underneath for a key. There it was. It was a bit rusty, but that was to be expected, it being left out here in weather like this. Standing up, Chrissy listened. She could hear voices from the back garden. She was sure of it. Maybe Mr. Lowen had sent a gardener after all. Would she be able to ask him to fill in a few of the cracks in the path? Chrissy smiled. There was no harm in asking, right? Making her way around the side of the cottage, she saw 2 men, one in a suit holding a large black umbrella and a clipboard, the other in torn jeans and a hoodie, with the hood pulled up against the rain. Chrissy tucked a stray hair behind her ear. The landlord must have come to oversee the gardening. She hadn't expected to meet him. She was sure he'd said he was now living in Spain, unless he hadn't liked the sound of her through the emails and had wanted to meet her in person. What if he decided he didn't like her? That he didn't want her living in his house? He couldn't go back on their agreed tenancy now, could he? She was pretty sure that a tenancy agreement was legally binding once signed. Taking a deep breath, she walked up behind them. Hello, I'm Chrissy. Twisting around quickly, The gardener looked at her and smiled, taking her hand. "Hello, Chrissy. I'm Luke." "Nice to finally meet you." Chrissy smiled and turned to look at the man in the suit, Mr. Lowen, holding a hand out to him. Glancing up from his clipboard, the man nodded, before returning his gaze and scribbling something on the paper. Lowering her hand, Chrissy tugged her hood further down. He had seemed so friendly through the emails. She shrugged. She guessed it wasn't as though you can really find out what someone is like through stilted online conversation. Maybe he was just quite a shy person in real life. Maybe that's why he had dealt with everything online. Unless something had happened, and he didn't want them to move in anymore. Biting the bottom of her lip, Chrissy tried to push away the thought of having to rock up on her parents' doorstep, kids, dog, and hamster in tow. Maybe they were right. Maybe marriage had become a throwaway commodity in this day and age, and she should have tried harder to please Andrew. She shook her head. They had some funny views. Always had. So, what was she supposed to do now? Just move her stuff in with him out here, or should she wait until he invited her to go in? She shuffled her feet and turned to the gardener. If she struck up a conversation with him, then maybe Mr. Lowen would join in and make her feel a little more at ease. "Are you okay starting with the hedges, please? It's just I've got a lot to get through that small gap." "The hedges? I think they're the least of our worries." Luke grinned, the skin around his blue eyes creasing. "Oh, really?" Pulling her eyes away from him, she looked around, taking in the knee-length grass and the mound of grey rocks poking up in the centre of the lawn, a nod to a long-forgotten rock garden feature, maybe. She nodded. It was worse around the back, she supposed, but it still made more sense to start at the front, surely. "It's just it would make my life easier, or else I've got to lift everything up and over them." "Everything?" Luke tilted his head, shallow lines forming across his forehead. "Well, yes, it's not furnished." "It's not, is it, Mr. Lowen?" She looked across to Mr. Lowen, pen still in hand, head still dipped across his paper. "Me?" Looking up, he tapped his pen against his chest. "I'm afraid I'm not Mr. Lowen." He looked towards Luke. "I'll leave you to it, Mr. Crevish. I've got an appointment at past anyway. I'll get these plans drawn up and emailed across as soon as I can." Luke shook the man's hand, and they both watched him pick his way carefully across the lawn, around to the front of the house. "I believe we may have crossed wires here." Luke crossed his arms and grinned at Chrissy. "Sorry, I assumed—" She pointed towards the front garden. "That he was Mr. Lowen? The Mr. Lowen that currently owns this cottage?" "Well, yes." Chrissy rubbed her hands together. It felt colder here than it had done when they had left their old house. "You are the gardener, right? Sorry, I should never have suggested you started with the hedges. It's your job. You know what you're doing." Dipping his head, a strange sound halfway between a laugh and a cough escaped his lips. Was he laughing at her? Subconsciously, touching her cheek with the back of her hand, she felt a blush flushing across her face. "I'm not a gardener." Why would Mr. Lowen have employed a gardener to sort this place out anyway? "And what are you here for, Chrissy?" "I'm here to move my stuff in, of course. It's the day my tenancy starts." Luke shoved his hands in his pockets and took a few steps away from her, turning his back and dipping his head. "Who are you, then?" She shook her head. "Are you sure you've got the right place?" Turning back towards Chrissy, Luke looked up, his lips straightened and his brow furrowed. "Of course. I can show you my tenancy if I need to. Are you working on behalf of Mr. Lowen?" "I'm buying this place." Taking his arms out of his pockets, he swung them at his side. "Are you? When? Are you going to keep renting it out? Mr. Lowen didn't say anything about it being sold." "No, I'm knocking it down." "What?" "Mr. Lowen promised me it would be a long-term let. I wouldn't have even considered the place if I had known we'd have to move again after the 6 months was up." Why would he have not been straight with her? Now what was she supposed to do? It had been hard enough finding this place when no estate agents would even look at her. And the girls, what about their school? There couldn't be many places up for rent in a village as small as this one. She'd promised them they wouldn't have to move schools again. 6 months? You've got to be kidding me. Luke kicked a loose stone, watching as it sprang and landed at the foot of a tree to the side of the garden. Hold on. Let me get this straight. Chrissy held her hands up in front of her. None of this made sense. Mr. Lowen has sold you this place, but didn't tell you I was moving in today. Not exactly. What do you mean? He either told you about us or not. I mean, it's not exactly sold. He promised to sell it to me if he didn't get a tenant. So you haven't brought it then? You're not knocking it down? Chrissy folded her arms. Yes, no. No, I haven't brought it yet, but we had a gentleman's agreement that he would sell it to me if he couldn't get a tenant by the end of the year, and, well, Luke swept his arm around the garden. I took it for a given that he wouldn't be able to. Why not? Yes, the garden may be a little overgrown, to say the least, but he's promised to get a gardener in to sort that out, so... Have you been inside? Luke interrupted her. I've seen photos of the inside. Mr. Lowen is in Spain, and as it's a private rental, he couldn't get anyone to show me around. But the photos look lovely, so... Why was he looking at her like that? With his head tilted. He looked as if he was trying to decide if she was lying or just a little crazy. You do know he's not been able to rent it out for over 3 years, don't you? 3 years? No, I didn't. I guess with it being in a village, the location might put people off. She knew some people liked the hustle and bustle of town living and having everything on your doorstep, but if she was honest, she was looking forward to embracing a slower pace of life. Those photos you were talking about, they didn't happen to have a blue Citroen out the front, did they? There may have been. I didn't take much notice of what car the previous tenants had. What was he playing at? The photos are from when this place was sold, 7 years ago. My old mate used to live here. He drove a blue Citroen. Oh, right. Evie, stop following me! Chrissy turned around. Sophia was stomping up the path, stepping over puddles and ducking under branches. Evie and Star close behind. Patch must have been left in the car. Star hasn't got her lead on. Walking quickly towards them, she pulled Star's lead out from the bag slung across her shoulder. She's okay. She listens to me. Look, sit, paw. Evie smiled as she took hold of Star's uplifted paw. That may be so, but she's never been here before. If she runs off, she won't be able to find her way back to us. Clipping the lead onto Star's red collar, Chrissy looked back at Luke. If you've not got anything in writing, then I guess I'm going to move our stuff in. Go ahead. Luke held his hand out towards the cottage. Who's he? Sophia asked. I'm not entirely sure. A friend of the landlord, I presume. Are you ready to have a look inside? No, I'd much rather stand here in this rubbish dump of a garden and get a little bit wetter. Sophia crossed her arms and stared at Chrissy. Sophia, please. I know this is difficult for you, but please don't talk to me like that. She patted Sophia on the shoulder. She knew it was tough for the girls. She was finding it difficult and she was an adult. She couldn't imagine what the twins were feeling. Get off me! Jerking her shoulder away from her, Sophia stomped to the front door, standing to the side, waiting for Chrissy. Okay, here we go. Home sweet home. Smiling, Chrissy twisted the key in the lock and pushed open the door. It stinks! Sophia and Evie both staggered back, covering their noses with their sleeves. I'm sorry, Mum, but we can't live in a place that stinks like that. It's okay, girls. It's not been lived in for a few years, so probably just needs the windows opening and some air let in. Chrissy took a deep breath and stepped inside. The tiled hallway, though caked in mud, looked okay. Opening the door on the left to the living room, Chrissy paused, gagging. Looking around the bare room, the dark wooden floorboards were covered in thick dust, and the windows barely let any light in. In the far corner, Chrissy spotted what looked like a splash of black paint thrown against the wall. Stamping the rain off of her trainers, she walked across to the wall. It wasn't paint. It was mould growing across the wall. A window pane was smashed in the corner of the window next to it. That must be why it was so mouldy. The smell was worse near the fireplace. Coughing into her sleeve, Chrissy backed away. Yuck! What's that on the... Her scarf pulled up over her mouth and nose. It's mould. The rain must have been getting in through the broken window. Is that what smells? No, I think there might be a dead bird or something stuck up the chimney. Oh no, the poor little thing. Can we save it? Mum said it was dead. Nothing can be saved when it's dead. Sophia turned her back on her sister and rolled her eyes. Anyway, let's go and have a look at the other rooms, shall we? Chrissy shepherded them both towards the kitchen and gingerly opened the door. And we're supposed to actually cook in here? Sophia pointed to the oven. I'm not going to be eating anything that comes out of that. The glass panel was missing from the oven door, and judging by the amount of ingrained food around the rings, the previous tenants had been worse cooks than Chrissy herself. Oh, Mum, look at the tap. Evie shook her head at the dripping tap, a ring of limescale circling the plug hole. What a waste of water. Yes, what a shame. With her hands on her hips, Chrissy swivelled around, taking in the small galley kitchen. The only drawer lay on its side, propped against the back of the work surface, and two cupboard doors were hanging off. A little different to the photos Mr. Lowen sent you, isn't it? Luke! Oh, how did you get in? Chrissy spun around. The front door? Lowering his hood, Luke ruffled his ash-blonde hair with his fingers. A little different, yes. Mr. Lowen couldn't be bothered to fix anything after he got the bailiffs to kick their last tenants out. Hence why it's in such a state and he hasn't been able to get a tenant. Oh, okay. Never mind. I'm sure you can find some other place to rent. Somewhere that has a working oven, maybe? It's not as easy as that. Curling a loose piece of hair around her finger, Chrissy blinked back the tears. Sure it is. Just pop along to an estate agent and voila, you'll soon be the proud tenant of a habitable house. Girls, why don't you go and check on Patch for me? Chrissy watched as Evie and Sophia ran back through the living room and out to the car. Let me find out where the nearest estate agent is for you. We used to have one down on the high street, but that shut down years ago. Bending his head, he scrolled through his phone. Looking out into the garden, Chrissy tried to slow her breathing. She was being daft, panicking. All she needed to do was send an email to Mr. Lowen and he'd send some contractors round to make the repairs and clean the cottage up. I don't suppose you have Mr. Lowen's number, do you? No. Luke laughed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But he doesn't give out his number to us villagers. He had too many complaints about his last tenant, so he changed his phone number. But you said you had an agreement with him about buying this place. You must have his number. Nope, afraid not. We had an agreement in place from when I saw him last. Well, he has. Sorry, you lost. Nah, you don't want to stay here, not with 2 kids in tow. It's a health hazard. It's less of a health hazard than living on the streets. Now that's just being melodramatic. Is it? With the pads of her thumbs, Chrissy wiped her eyes before turning around and facing Luke. All my money is wrapped up in this tenancy. I've paid 6 months in advance. Luke whistled through his teeth. Without seeing it? Yep, without seeing it. The estate agents wouldn't even consider a single unemployed mum with a dog. This place seemed perfect, our only choice. Tapping his fingers on the grimy work surface, Luke looked at her, a half smile on his face. No chance you're walking away from this place, then? Not for 6 months, anyway. Chrissy slapped her forehead. How could I be so stupid? You're not stupid, just trusting, that's all. I think that's been the problem my whole life. Why was she even talking to a complete stranger like this? Especially one who wanted to make her and the twins homeless. In that case, I guess my grand plans of knocking this dump down to build a 4-bedroom money-maker will have to wait. Thank you. Right, I need to get on. It's getting late and my girls start their new school in the morning. Are you seriously going to sleep here with it in this state? You've no idea what it's like upstairs. Nope. I'm going to see if they have room in little B&B for tonight, and then I'll clean it tomorrow once Mr. Lowen has replied to the strongly worded email I'm going to send him. Okay, good plan. You never know, Mr. Lowen might give you your money back. I doubt that very much, from what you've told me about him. Stranger things have happened. I think they let dogs stay at the B&B in the centre of the village, so your luck might be changing. You think they'll let us take a hamster in too? Now that she had a proper plan in place, she felt calmer. Things would be okay. The worst-case scenario would be that Mr. Lowen would refuse to make good the repairs. She just wouldn't let herself think about what might happen to them if he decided it was too much bother and terminated the tenancy. But he couldn't do that legally, could he? Chrissy was sure he couldn't. It would be fine. Chapter 3. Hey, Chrissy, stop! Lifting her knee up, Chrissy rested her foot on the trailer's tyre, bearing the brunt of the chest of drawers on her hip. She twisted her body to see who was in such a hurry to speak to her. Luke, what's the matter? That's the matter. As he jogged towards her, he pointed to the chest of drawers. Here, let me help. You'll give yourself an injury. I'm fine, honest. Or she would be if she could just get on with it. The wood was digging into her hip. Let me help. You grab the other end. Yes, sir. As Luke slowly backed away, pulling the chest of drawers towards him, Chrissy grabbed the other end and pulled it out of the trailer. No need to be sarcastic, I'm only helping you. Shaking her head, she reminded herself that this was Luke, a virtual stranger, trying to be nice. It wasn't Andrew, who had always insisted on helping her and doing things for her, rendering her incapable, or at least believing she herself was incapable. Sorry, thank you. Have you heard back from Mr. Lowen? Yes, I got a curt email back, basically saying I could either sort it all out myself or find somewhere else, but he would keep my money regardless. I signed the contract, didn't I? It was my fault for not insisting on viewing the place. Plus, nowhere else would take me on anyway, so it's all immaterial. Sorry, your plans are well and truly scuppered. No worries, I'm sure I can talk him into selling it to me at a later date. Backing into the cottage, Chrissy noticed Luke's muscles flexing under his jumper. I need to go to the gym more. Luke laughed and lifted his end of the chest of drawers up and down, impersonating a weightlifter. You look fine as you are. She averted her eyes quickly. She hadn't meant for it to come out like that. Feeling the heat of a blush rapidly racing across her cheeks, she jerked her head, trying to flick her hair across her face to cover it. I didn't mean it like that. I meant... It's okay. I'm happy to take a compliment. Luke laughed, seemingly...